We're going to do something a little bit different now and talk to someone who's been at the centre of, I was going to say a media storm. It's much more than a media storm. It's a storm in the world of academia. It's a storm in the world of gender identity. Kathleen Stock joins me. She's described on Wikipedia as a British philosopher and writer. When I ever see that word philosopher, I immediately get intimidated, Kathleen. So I'm very intimidated as I sit here now. But thank you for joining us. The reason that obviously I want to talk to you is because of what's happened to you over the last year, where you were at the University of Sussex. I think you've been there for 18 years, haven't you? After being at a much better university, the University of East Anglia. What possessed you to leave there, I do not know. And then you became embroiled in, well, I'd rather hear you describe it in your own words, actually, because I don't want to put words into your mouth. What happened? Why are you basically here?
Well, about 3 years ago, I started to write about this idea of self-ID that was coming in. The government had a consultation on it. The idea was that we should change the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act at the time to talk about gender identity as a protected characteristic. And that is roughly the idea that inside you there's a feeling of whether you're really female or male, that may not, or neither, that may not correspond to your actual bodily facts. So that was being presented as a very good thing, that we should just move to self-ID. And I was worried, along with lots of other people, mostly women, that this would make a difference in practice, because being a woman, normally, as understood in terms of sex, gives you access to changing rooms, domestic violence refuges, rape crisis shelters, prisons and so on the basis of sex. And the idea was this was all going to be unpicked and changed. And so I started to talk about that. It's a very controversial area, as I'm sure you know. And immediately I started to get flack, basically. And then it sort of escalated. And then about 2 months ago, it reached crisis point, pretty much.
But it was your decision to leave your job, because I mean, some people have written that you were cancelled, but you kind of cancelled yourself in a sense.
I don't think I was cancelled either by myself or by anyone else, because I'm here, aren't I? I'm still talking, and I'm still going to keep talking about it. The real problem with what's happened to me, and there was various big, quite aggressive protests at my workplace about me that caused me to want to resign. The big problem is for everyone else, the people that are left. The women in particular that feel as I do, but feel very intimidated about being able to express their point of view because they're worried that the same thing will happen to them.
Why do you think people, whatever their views, I mean, and this I think does happen on both sides of this argument, people get so obsessed by it and become so intolerant of another person's viewpoint, and they use very lurid language to throw at you, saying that you want to eliminate trans people. Well, yeah. I mean, I know what I think that word means. I do not want to eliminate trans people. In fact, I'm on record as saying over and over and over again that I'm very happy that the Gender Recognition Act exists as it is, and I'm happy that gender reassignment is a protected characteristic in the Equality Act. So that basically means trans people cannot legally be discriminated against at work, or bullied, or harassed, or face transphobic violence legally. So that's good. The argument is not about whether there should be legal protections for trans people. There should be. The argument is whether we should change these existing legal protections to protect this sort of inner feeling that you couldn't possibly guess someone had or they didn't have from the outside, that they would have to tell you about it. And as soon as they've said, as soon as a male says, I feel like a woman, according to this idea, they should have access to all the spaces and resources and rights that a woman has. That's the bit I'm objecting to. And that's perfectly consistent with saying trans people should have legal rights, because they should. And for that, you're called a TERF?
Yeah.
Just say what that means.
Well, it stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. Now, I am a feminist. I'm actually not a radical feminist. And I'm not trans exclusionary in any way. As I've just said, I think trans people should have legal rights, and so I'm not exclusionary in any bad way either, but it's a handy label you can shout at somebody to get them to shut up, basically.
And it's thrown at all sorts of people who most people would think of as having perfectly reasonable views. J.K. Rowling, they call her a TERF. Julie Bindel, who, I mean, you can't get much more arch-feminist than Julie Bindel.
No.
And a lot of the people that are using this language, they've fought for decades for women's rights. This is what, as a man, I must admit, I don't understand this, how people who fought for decades for women's rights are now perfectly happy to give them up.
Well, sorry, Julie Bindel's not willing to give them up.
But people on the other side of this debate.
Well, I think they must be confused. That's the only explanation, or else they never really cared about women's rights and only pretended to, because it's just obvious that if you're going to try and change the definition of a woman so that now it includes males who say they're women, and that's the only criterion for them to count, then it's going to have massive ramifications for women, 51% of the population. And in the context of the statistics on sexual violence, which, the vast majority of that is carried out by males on females, the murder rate of women, 3 on average a week, and you're just going to say what paltry safeguards are already in the system can be taken away, then you're not a feminist. And I just think they should give back their feminist cards.
Let's look at the definitions here. Because you're right, people think that, well, if I decided that I was a woman, I could literally now say I'd self-declare as a woman, and that would how I would have to be recognised. Do you believe that you can only change sex if you go through an operation?
I think you can change. The facts of the matter are you can legally change sex, what's called legally changing sex, if you get a gender recognition certificate. That doesn't require you to have an operation. Whether you haven't literally changed sex, and I'm afraid I also think that you can't literally change sex even if you have an operation or even if you have hormones. So your sex is something that's determined biologically at conception. It's in every cell of your body, and if you're a trans woman and you go to hospital, you're still going to have to tell the doctors that you are a trans woman, because it will make a difference to medication and pain thresholds and all sorts of things. So I'm afraid I don't think anyone can literally change sex. I think that's scientifically established.
So in terms of a trans woman who was a man, by your definition, she can never be a woman.
If she could be a woman, she wouldn't be a trans woman. I mean, that's I'm afraid, yes. So I know these things are uncomfortable to say, but I think the thing is that we're now so frightened of saying them that this is the situation we've got ourselves in, where we can no longer say women, as in adult human females, can have their own spaces and can have their own sports teams and their own organisations if they want them. So, yeah, I'm afraid spelling it out, trans women and women are 2 different categories.
But is it true legally that a trans woman is a woman?
Well, if they have a gender recognition certificate, then they have what's called an acquired gender, which, according to the terms of the law, gives them a change in legal sex. But then actually even the Gender Recognition Act immediately goes on to specify contexts in which you haven't, that this acquired gender is not relevant. One of them is sports, I think, and the other one is hereditary peerages and things like that. So funnily enough, they get left alone.
I never knew that. But if a woman is not a biologically accurate description, what do you think the law is describing here?
I think it's describing, originally that act was set up, conceived very differently to the way that modern trans activism thinks. So it was thought that it mostly would be males, and it would mostly be people with what's called gender dysphoria, like strong, distressing feelings about their bodies, and that they would be desperate to go through an operation and take hormones, and that they would then gradually change their appearance over time so they would come to look like women. And that is, of course, true of lots of transsexuals today in the country. And so it was giving them the right to privacy, because they looked very like women, and yet they were constantly having to give their documents that would say they were male, and that could be very embarrassing and sometimes actually dangerous. So it was trying to find a way to make the 2 things match up by saying, under certain circumstances we will grant this, but it had conditions attached, like you had to live as a woman for 2 years, and you had to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, this sort of treated as a condition. So those are the things that modern trans activism wants to get rid of. They just want to say, no, you just fill in a form. You don't have to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. You certainly don't have to have had any operations or take any hormones. You can just, if you feel like you're a woman, you're a woman.
And some countries have gone down that road, haven't they?
Yes.
And the US, I think, being one of the latest.
I think in the US it varies from state to state, actually. So I think some states are much more permissive than others.
But I think in the US you can now you don't have to identify as male or female. You can put an X on your passport.
In some states, I believe that's true. Yes.
And I think the British government was going down that road, but they've pulled back from it.
Yes. So in 2018, they were doing a consultation at the time, which strongly suggested that they thought it was a good idea to go to self-ID, because it was being presented to them by organisations like Stonewall as kind of like, there's absolutely no cost to this, it's win-win, you're just letting people free to be themselves. But the trouble is, we don't live in a world in which people being free to be themselves doesn't have costs on other people. Sometimes you need to think about the interaction with wider society. And the problem is that, there are all sorts of reasons to keep women-only spaces for women if we can.
Just on that, how many cases have there been where, I guess we're talking about changing rooms, we're talking about prisons, maybe other areas as well. Mm-hmm. But for the number of cases that have been identified where a man, somebody who had been a man who now identifies as a woman, has sexually attacked a woman in one of those spaces, it's a pretty small number, isn't it?
It's as far as I know, that it's a small number. I mean, there's been cases. There's one in particular in Dundee that I can think of. Katie Dolotovsky attacked a child in a Tesco's toilet or Sainsbury's toilet. There's been the one in prison involving Karen White, who didn't have a gender recognition certificate but was and had a conviction for a sex attack and was in a women's prison. But I mean, partly this is, I think, so there's different things to be said about these different contexts, but take the average changing room one. Changing rooms is not so much, it is a worry about those women. I think those women, why should we discount their experience? It certainly shouldn't be sort of weighed up against some other kind of feeling.
No, but they've all, since time immemorial, there have always been perverts in changing rooms. Yeah,
but we don't want to make it worse. And basically we're allowing opportunistic males to self-identify into spaces, and they will. So nobody has, I've made this point a few times, but nobody has thought up until now, as far as I know, that excluding you from a women's changing room is an insult to you, or it suggests that you might be a sex attacker. The idea is you exclude males as far as possible generally in order to protect women from the few predators that there will be. That's human nature.
I suppose the point is,
isn't
it a sort of sledgehammer to crack a nut, given that these incidents are very, very rare?
Well, from a woman's perspective, that's a really quite breathtakingly casual thing to say. And it does betray a certain angle that is often taken by male commentators, if you don't mind me saying so, because from a woman's perspective, when we go into the changing rooms, we don't know. So we're being asked to assume that that a man or a male can identify their way into the changing room, and we just have to assume that most of the time they won't hurt us. A lot of women have in their past sexual assault experiences. A lot of women just want privacy. There's no reason why we can't ask for those things. Women are allowed to have their own things. So of course we can also provide third spaces. Why don't we have that conversation instead of assuming that women are there to sort out this problem? And the argument, of course, is supposed to be that trans women are being protected from male violence in male changing rooms by coming into the women's. So it's women being asked to sort out a problem caused by males. Why can't we resource third changing rooms?
Well, that's an interesting point. So you think, trans women should have their own
Well, why not?
Rooms?
We've got to accommodate this problem. We've been told it's a pressing social problem. Well, women think it's a pressing social problem for them too. So let's try and be creative about our solutions.
Kate in West Sussex has sent in a text saying, it sounds to me like this lady has an issue with men pretending to be women and not trans women. If a bloke wants to attack a woman, he'll do so. He doesn't need to pretend to be a woman to do so.
But that's a very strange thing. Safeguarding precedes from thinking about the worst situation, not the best. And it's like saying if somebody wants to abuse children, they will. So we shouldn't have safeguarding in there. Women could do with more safeguarding than they already have. But the very least that they can expect is that when they get undressed or when they sleep, that they can, if they've gone into a sort of public space to do so, then they should be as far as possible protected. So we're not saying that no women will be attacked in these spaces. We're saying that we're trying to minimise that. And one way to make things a lot worse would be to say that any opportunistic male that wants to can just come in.
Somebody on Twitter says, why not just have cubicles instead of changing rooms? Changing rooms are... It's gone. Outdated, I think, was the word that was on the tweet. That used to be the case. I remember sort of when I was a child going into sort of swim change rooms in Cambridge, they were always cubicles rather than this open space.
Well, if we invest a lot of public money in improving things, that would be a start. But even with cubicles, you can have people putting cameras underneath. We're not just talking about sexual assault, we're talking about voyeurism, we're talking about public masturbation. There's a lot of opportunity here in these spaces for misdemeanour.
I can't believe we're already 20 minutes into the hour. We're going to come to some calls soon. 0345 6060 973. If you'd like to talk to Kathleen between now and 9 o'clock, we'd love to hear from you. It's 20 past 8.
This is LBC. Iain Dale, text 84850. This is LBC.
22 minutes past 8, we're with Professor Kathleen Stock. We're talking about trans rights, gender identity. We're going to, in fact, why not let's take some calls right now. Dave is in Guildford. Hello, Dave.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hello, Kathleen.
Hiya.
Just wanted to ask you a question, actually. You said at the beginning of the conversation that you didn't want to essentially eliminate trans women from public life. I was wondering then why you actually signed the WHRC declaration, which essentially is calling for basically trans women to be removed from pretty much all spaces that involve women, to legally protect parents who wish to block trans kids from accessing any help at all, to legally protect deliberate misgendering, to ban trans women from being recognised as mothers and trans men from being recognised as fathers, to ban scientific research towards trans women getting pregnant.
What does WHRC stand for, by the way?
The Women's Sex-Based Rights Declaration that's been made by the
Women in Human Rights Campaign.
That's
right.
The one, yes.
Okay. Right. Well, there's quite a lot in that, Kathleen.
There's a lot in that. Well, that was a quite tendentious, in my opinion, presentation of what that sounds. So there's a declaration that was written in 2019, I think, and it went round by email, and I got a copy, and along with hundreds and hundreds of other people, I signed it. It did not aim to eliminate trans women from public life. I'm afraid I disagree. I mean, it's true that this has been said several times recently, but it's just not true. And anyone who wants to go and look at the text of that can see it. In fact, I saw recently that only a couple of weeks ago, Richard Dawkins signed it when he saw it. And I'm sure he wouldn't sign up to some of the things you just said. But it is true, I think, if you take children and whether children should be given puberty blockers, I don't think they should. And it's true that I don't think children should be given cross-sex hormones or... and in America, they can have a double mastectomy by the time they're 14. So I definitely don't think those things should happen because I believe that children can change their minds later about these things and be quite confused about it.
Well, I've actually got
some
of the wording here. So, for example, we reaffirm motherhood as an exclusively female status.
Yeah, I do think that's true.
And that was one of the things that Dave was pointing out, that he obviously thinks that's not right. We reaffirm women's and girls' rights to physical and reproductive integrity and oppose their exploitation through surrogacy and related practices. What does that even mean?
Well, it taps into a wider conversation about whether human bodies are a resource to be used, and so feminists like me are also very worried about the practice of surrogacy, which is often an exploitative transaction with isn't it, sometimes with people in much poorer countries being used for their bodies, basically, in order to provide rich
But surely
people
if
with
a woman
children.
wants to be a surrogate mother, that is her exclusive decision. That's the ultimate. Surely a feminist would think that was a great thing, that a woman decides what to do with her own body.
Well, feminism's a
Don't want
broad
to lecture
church, and
about
that sounds
feminism,
like what I would call a liberal feminist, who is absolutely all about choice and freedom, but it's usually, a certain myopia about how one person's freedoms can impact other people. So we have a different conception of feminism there, and I'm sure, we could talk about that for hours. But in terms of, I think what the caller said, something about, did I get that wrong? Trans women, there is a movement to give trans women womb transplants, basically. Now, I definitely don't think that that's a good use of the NHS's resources either. So I think these are deep matters. We're not going to necessarily sort it out in a 2-minute soundbite. But yeah, there are some views I have that I unashamedly have, and I think they're feminist ones.
Dave?
I just think that this some of this document, especially some of the co-signatories, people like Graham Linehan, who, shall we say, has been banned from every form of social media pretty much and has some quite extreme views. You've got people like Richard Dawkins who signed this. You've got groups like the LGBT Alliance.
He's not. You couldn't describe Richard Dawkins. I mean, I don't agree with him on virtually anything, but you can't describe him as an extremist.
Some of the things that he said recently have been quite contentious. I mean, you've got other
contentious
groups
is
on there,
one thing, extremist is another.
And this is basically guilt by association, which is, a very common tactic. But, these people, how am I responsible for what other people sign?
Well, you're not responsible for what other people sign.
Thank you.
But you're in the same group of people, so therefore it is almost like guilt by association when you do have extremists that are co-signatories of this document, which is essentially
they probably shop at Tesco's, but it doesn't mean everyone at shop at Tesco's is an extremist. Not that I accept that these people are extremists, but this is a really crass tactic to try and get at me, to be honest, because I do things that lots of other people do.
I don't think it's crass, to be honest. I think that you have put your signature alongside a lot of other people who have quite extremist views, and obviously there is an association.
Do you regard J.K. Rowling as an extremist, Dave?
I wouldn't say she's an extremist. No.
Well,
but she believes the same things that Kathleen believes.
I think. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, I just said J.K. Rowling is essentially believing roughly the same things as my interpretation. I mean, Kathleen, disagree with me if you like, but they're both saying the same thing. And if you don't think J.K. Rowling is an extremist, I mean, you haven't said that you think Kathleen is, but given that you've criticised her for signing this declaration, you don't agree with her. That's quite clear, and that's perfect. Disagreement is fine.
I don't agree with the things that J.K. Rowling has said necessarily. I don't agree with some of the way that she's sort of gone about some of the things. For example, the 3 people peacefully protesting outside her house saying that she was doxxed, when that address, for example, was readily available all over Google and in the national press.
I'm sorry, Dave. I don't think anybody should be protesting about anything outside somebody's private house. I think that is a disgrace.
Yeah, and her address is not readily available. That's an absolute myth.
It is. I mean, if you go and look, for example...
Well, no, I don't. No. We're not going to go into any area where Kathleen's address could be identified, because you've kind of lost the argument just by saying that. I think it is an absolute disgrace that anybody, that whether they're a private individual or have put their head above the parapet in the way that Kathleen has, they do not deserve to have their home life disrupted in that way. Whether they're politicians, whether they're academics, whether they're celebrities, whether they're anybody, that is one step too far. Dave, thank you very much. 0345 6060 973. Interesting text here from Lucy, who says, I really wanted to be a boy until I was about 14. These things aren't necessarily fixed at all, especially not for children and teenagers. I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because I've talked to mothers who phoned into the programme, this is several years ago now, who said that I know that my 4-year-old has been born into the wrong body, and yet your heart goes out to them in a sense, and everyone rushes to judgment on those things, don't they?
Well, they may rush to judgment, but what we really need to do is think about what it means to think that your 4-year-old child could have been born in the wrong body. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because 4-year-olds are building their map of the world. They don't even necessarily know what it is to be a boy or a girl. And what we are finding and hearing from clinicians in gender identity clinics is that there is a higher proportion than normal of same-sex attracted adolescents, or autistic children and adolescents, or children with a history of trauma. So there's many reasons why they might say I'm in the wrong body, but it doesn't mean adults need to rush to say, yes, you are. We need to listen carefully. But this is something that can be resolved, and probably will resolve if left alone when they get a bit older.
And just finally, before we go to the news, just responding to that call from Dave, where he was saying so-and-so is an extremist. This tweet says, "Not every trans woman is a sex pest, as you're indirectly seeming to say, and see how this works." Kathleen says.
Well, I'm absolutely not saying that, and of course, as I'm not saying every man is a sex pest, because I say no, that men should stay out of women's changing rooms. This is safeguarding, as I say. You exclude the many because of the few, and that's how it works. So, no, I absolutely know that most trans people are not in any way predatory, and trans women as well. I absolutely know that because I know some trans women.
We'll come back to more of your calls in a moment with Kathleen Stock. It's 8:32. Let's get the news headlines with Andy Ivey.
The Chancellor is... Iain Dale, tweet at LBC.
8:35 on LBC. We're with Professor Kathleen Stock taking your calls. Let's have a couple of texts before we come to another call. So grateful for this programme. It's been really calm and clearly gone through the issues which have been in the media for a long time. And another one, what medical condition is a sex change supposed to cure? Where are the medics in curing the social fallout? I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. This is really refreshing to hear, says Dave, who's stuck on the M56. Sorry to hear that, Dave. Someone with a structured and sensible view which is factual yet stands in the face of a seriously oversensitive society. Anna is in Kingston upon Thames. Hello, Anna.
Hello, hi.
Hello.
Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to call up and give my support to Kathleen. I was driving from the shop, funny enough, the shop that you mentioned earlier, Kathleen, and I just thought, wow, it's so. I'm so glad that somebody's speaking up about this, as whether it was an email or text, or somebody saying oversensitive environment we're in at the moment, etc., etc. When I first heard about this, which is quite a while ago, as a woman myself and as a mother to a daughter, I was quite astounded that basically from one day to another, a person can self-identify, if I understand correctly, and decide whatever sex they should belong to. And I initially thought, back to when my daughter was little, when she was a toddler, 4 or 5 years old, a little bit older like that, when we were standing in ladies' rooms queues, and then at times, you might have to say to your girl, okay, you can go in by yourself. If any of that changed, or if I saw somebody who I thought, hold on a second, is this really a queue for, and I hope I'm saying this in the correct way, but before, like, women only, I would feel as a mother, like I said to your daughter, I would be very worried. As you mentioned before as well, opportunists, people who just decide, again, maybe waking up one day and saying, okay, I'm going to self-identify as a woman today, and then they're just going to do and go and do horrible things to women and to young girls, to young children. So thank you for speaking up about this. I just think it's really good and fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, no question there, but we got your point of view, Anna. Thank you. Let's go to Katie, who's a new caller in Bristol. Hi, Katie.
Hi. I wanted to call to say I think it's perfectly reasonable to say the WHRC declaration is extremist and anyone who signed it, because it calls for such extreme measures. For example, banning all trans women and trans girls from all women's spaces. There was some confusion with the last caller who seemed to think that trans women and girls don't use these spaces today, but they do. And a ban would ruin the lives of tens of thousands of people across the country. I don't know how is that not extremist?
Well, I mean, tens of thousands, we don't really know because we can't get reliable stats
thousands
on...
then, even if it's hundreds.
Well, listen,
you'd be ruining the lives of thousands. These people use these spaces every single day for their protection from the same misogynistic sexism that you face.
Yeah.
Yes.
As I said earlier, I think that we need to think creatively about that, and that we could resource...
for a blanket ban. There's no creative. If the WHRC declaration calls for a blanket ban,
I think that where women, I think that where women and girls get undressed or sleep or are otherwise vulnerable to sexual assault, yes,
which is in the list.
Yes, you are correct about my view. I think that where women and girls are vulnerable, especially vulnerable to a range of sexual assaults that don't just include the very worst, but also include voyeurism, camera crimes, upskirting. We should protect. I've been a victim of that myself. Right. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but we should protect them. Now, it's true, as I said earlier, that there are transsexuals who have been through medical transition, taken hormones for years, and who are I could not tell the difference. They are using those spaces.
But you're calling to ban them from the toilets too.
I have no way of stopping people who look like women from using women's spaces. I have no way of stopping any of it anyway, because I'm not the police. But I'm saying what I'm talking about is males who have had no intervention whatsoever, who simply say...
Why have you signed a document that says you want to ban all trans women and trans girls, including those who pass?
I think people think that I sat...
We could say,
Katie, you do need to let Kathleen answer.
There's two things to say about this. One, just generally about this WHRC declaration. I was never, I'm just saying parenthetically, I was never asked about this until Sussex and the massive protest kicked off, and suddenly this got discovered as the reason. I mean, it's completely confected. Nobody had a clue I signed that until somebody looked it up 2 months ago. Secondly, I think you all think I was in some sort of big ceremony with a gold pen. I literally got an email and added my name along with hundreds and hundreds of other people.
Well, so now you know.
Well, now I do, but and I'm explaining.
Would you condemn something that extreme? Because
I don't think it is extreme.
Should you not have read it though before you signed it?
I did read it. But have you read it yourself?
None of these things that Katie's saying, that they didn't sort of trigger you to think, maybe this is a little bit much.
Well, no, I'm explaining that this is my view. But I have also said...
So it is your view that you
can
want
I
to ban
finish
all
my sentence? Because I do think it is relevant to your question, whether or not you agree. I personally don't see the pressing social problem as trans women who have had medical transitions using women's changing rooms. I see the pressing social problem, for me personally, where I've directed all of my energy in the last few years, is self-ID. And the idea that you don't need to do any of that.
Saying that. You signed something calling for a blanket ban. If you don't want a blanket ban, why don't you remove your name from the list and condemn the extreme
Katie, would it make a difference to you if I did? Would you then say that the rest of what I thought was reasonable? Or is this just a total nonsense of an objection because you don't like what I say generally, so you've found this example and you're going on about it? Because basically, who cares whether I signed an email or not? My view's my views, and I'm explaining it. Well, I got it by email and I signed it. Like, I literally put my name into a box on my computer. I did. This is just a distraction from the fact that I've written a whole book explaining my views. Do you agree with the rest of my views? All right, that. Let's never forget the blanket ban. Do you agree that self-ID that should not be the criterion of entry into women-only spaces? Do you agree with that?
That's the situation we have today. Is that what you mean by self-ID?
Do you think that males who say they're women and just on that basis should have access into women's changing rooms?
But that's the situation we've had.
So you do think think that's right? Well, I disagree with you. It's the situation that you've had your entire life, and I disagree with you about that
too.
I'm
not calling to blanket ban you from the toilet. And you are calling to blanket ban trans women, regardless of my position, regardless of how well they've transitioned.
All right,
I've tried to explain my position.
Katie, thank you very much. You've had a good go there. Simon's got an interesting one. Kathleen, he says, please ask Kathleen if she'd like to ban lesbians from changing rooms in case they set themselves on
Well, I am a lesbian, so I wouldn't be able to use changing rooms. But as far as I know, lesbians are not...
You can see the logic of the point he's made.
And I will continue because it's a point that's been made to me several times,
I'm sure
you know. the thing is, there's two things there. One is that, as far as I know, lesbians are not responsible for the vast majority of sexual assaults on females.
No, but there are predatory lesbians,
Yes,
just
and
as there are predatory gay men.
The logic of this suggests that when we've got a safeguarding measure, that if it doesn't eliminate all possible sources of violence against women, then we mustn't have it. And that is not how safeguarding works.
Do you think that
excluding males from women-only spaces is a start? Now, of course, it's not going to solve every problem that women encounter, but it's going to reduce the risk, which is what safeguarding does.
I suppose you could argue, though, that, I mean, you've made the argument before, well, that we don't know how many trans men there are in Britain. I mean, Stonewall reckoned that 1% of the population would identify as trans, so that would be 600,000 people, male and female. Would there be more trans men who are a danger to women in changing rooms?
You mean trans women?
Sorry, trans women in changing rooms than predatory lesbians, for example. I mean, we can never know that, but it's a reasonable thing to posit, isn't it?
Well, the second point is that how do these spaces operate? Obviously, there's no one at the door on the average municipal changing room saying, you, not you. Yes, show me your character reference. Okay, so it basically operates by sight. It's a rough and ready. Now, we are hardwired as a species to recognise the opposite sex, which isn't to say that there aren't cases where we won't be able to do it, but most of the time we can. So if someone looks like a male, that gives us a visual clue that they might be male. Well, there is no way of recognising a lesbian, right? There is not, so it just couldn't work like that in spaces. You couldn't have a space for lesbians and not lesbians. They look identical to other women. So basically, again, it's another crap analogy that's used to kind of be a gotcha, as if, if there's a flaw in the logic, we should just abandon all women-men distinctions. It doesn't work like that. Safeguarding is supposed to reduce risk. It couldn't possibly eliminate it.
Do you think that there is a broader ideology behind the trans women are women definition? If so, what is it ultimately trying to achieve?
I don't know. I mean, it's a really misguided strategy on behalf of trans activists, and actually, I'm getting letters increasingly and emails from trans people, including trans women, who are saying, I did not ask for this. I know I'm not a woman. If I wasn't a woman, if I was a woman, I wouldn't have had to go through this whole procedure. And they don't agree that the only way for trans women and trans men to get rights is to say that they're literally the opposite sex. So I don't really understand the thinking behind it, because it's been incredibly divisive, as you can see.
This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:49, Greg on Twitter says, say what you want about Iain Dale, and most people often do, rarely agree with his political views, but comes into his own when hosting a difficult debate. A great listen tonight, and well done, Kathleen Stock. Let's take another call from Farah in Maidstone. Farah, hi, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, Iain.
Hi.
I see we're platforming another turf. When are we going to get round
Well, you see, that is not a very good start to your call, is it? By just being gratuitously insulting.
Okay, so let me state my point. Trans women, I am one of those. We make up 1% of the population. Yet every single day there's articles written in the newspapers. I turn on the radio each night and I hear stations like this giving the opposition.
Did you tune in 3 weeks ago when I had two trans women on the programme for an hour? India Willoughby.
I did.
Pardon?
Yeah, I did.
You did?
I did, and it was fantastic.
Exactly. So don't tar us with the same brush that you're tarring everyone else with, because we give everyone a voice.
Not my point, Iain. It's not my point. I'm saying that every day there's articles in the newspapers, there's radio stations. LBC, I take my hat off to you, Iain, for doing that show the other week, and it was fantastic. We make up 1% of the population. Now, every day in the newspaper, they're trying to make out that trans women are a problem to women and that we attack women in these spaces. And we don't. There's no facts. There's nothing to back up this fear-mongering.
But Farah, there have been well-documented incidents. I accept that they are few and far between, but there have been incidents, haven't there?
There really hasn't.
You can't say there haven't when we've got the evidence that there has. I accept that they're very rare, but there are unfortunate incidents that's happened.
That happened during this year. Can you name any?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Exactly. There aren't, Iain. But it's being amplified by the massive amount of coverage in the press. And basically what the press is doing is exactly the same as what they did to homosexuals back in the 80s. They're labelling or trying to frame us all as perverts.
So what's your question to Kathleen Farrar?
My question is this. Why change something if there's nothing wrong with the status quo? We have been using women-only spaces for hundreds of years, and there are no documented or very, very minute documented occurrences where people have been attacked.
Okay.
We're talking minute. We make up 1%.
All right. Well, let me put that question that you put to me to Kathleen. Can you name any incidents that have happened in this year?
This year?
No.
Well, I can name other ones that have happened in the last few years, and I can't remember off the top of my head the names of the individuals involved. But this is a matter of public record, so people can go and look. I mean, Katie Dolakotowski in Dundee, Karen White, the famous one. And they are happening. And the other thing is to say is that women are self-excluding from spaces because they are frightened of what is going to happen or they think might happen. And that is a reason to worry about this too.
But isn't that, because Farrar is right there, that is partly because of some newspapers in particular ramping this up, making people think that this is happening all the time?
No, because as I try to keep explaining, the worry is not about trans women. The worry is about males. It is not saying it is going to happen. It is saying that we want to safeguard to try and stop it happening. And it's in conjunction with this policy that is being pushed by Stonewall and other organisations of self-ID, right? The self-ID is the context that you need to constantly keep in mind. It is not saying anything about the average transsexual who has been through a medical transition. It is saying that any male at all can say they feel like a female and enter these spaces. That is what we are talking about. And it is not relevant to talk about transsexuals who've been through a medical transition. Those are not the people that we are talking about. We are talking about males who say, I feel like a woman. We don't even know if they're trans, but they could still come in to these changing rooms or dormitories or hostels or domestic violence refuges or rape crisis shelters. Those are all spaces which women have a right to have on their own terms.
You mentioned the Karen White case. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah, but look, you've put me on the spot, so I didn't go and check the names of, but there have been cases, okay? Now, they're not many. No, I am not entering this conversation saying it's likely to happen to you. I'm not. I don't know how many times I have to say that, because the point is not about that. The point is about this gives a charter to any opportunistic male who wants to come in to a place where women are vulnerable.
And Farrar, you have to understand that, don't you?
I fully understand that, and Kathleen appears to be all over the place because she's saying that women are in danger from trans women, and she's stated
I'm
that
not.
over and over again. She's made her.
I'm saying they're in danger from males.
She's written books.
Males. No, have you read my book?
Yes, but Kathleen...
Well, then you'd know that I say repeatedly that trans women are not the particular danger. It's males.
Kathleen, I ask you a question. Am I male or female?
I don't know you, Farrar, so how would I know?
I'm a trans woman.
Well, then I'm afraid you're genetically male. Yes.
Exactly, and this is...
It's a fact, it's your biology, it was determined at conception. I'm sorry.
Person, but you don't accept trans women.
No, I don't accept you change sex, I'm afraid. I don't think it's scientifically possible.
And calling for all trans women to be banned from female spaces when you have no facts. You say you've been put on the spot with that particular question, but frankly, you've made your life's work victimising trans women.
Well, I disagree with that.
Don't know and you say that you've been put on the spot. For someone that has spent so much time writing about us and then claiming you were put on the spot and you can't answer that. The fact is that there are no facts to say that trans women are attacking people.
Okay.
I've tried to explain my position. I'm sorry you didn't understand
Farrar,
it.
thank you very much for your call. I mean, just final word on that. Trans women themselves are often in danger too, aren't they? Just by the very nature. Do you not think that they're in more danger generally than women in changing rooms are generally?
How many trans women were killed this year? None. How many trans women were killed, or trans people, last year? None. And before that, 1 a year on average in the UK. 3 women a week are murdered. You do the math.
Okay. Jazz is in Nottingham. Hello, Jazz.
Hi, Ian. Thank you for taking my call. Good evening, Professor Stock.
Hiya.
I just wanted to say a massive thank you for the work you've done and how outspoken and courageous and wonderful how wonderfully you've handled the situation. And I'm really sorry that you felt pressured that you had to resign from your position in academia as a result of the protests and everything like that.
Thank you.
I personally do not express my views on this issue because I'm a legal professional and stuff like that, and it could land me in a lot of hot water. So I'm grateful that there's someone like you doing the work for women like myself.
Thank you.
I virtually agree with everything that you stated this evening and in your book and the position that you take. And I feel like it's something that really gets under my skin, because it feels like whenever this topic is approached in the media or in radio shows like this evening in Iain's one or whichever platform, I feel like the trans community or trans women in particular, they just spin it on its head completely and victimize themselves. And it feels like they're trying to, well, not them in particular, but a very vocal, loud
minority, I think.
Radical minority want the rights of trans women in particular to supersede the rights of women. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I feel like I can't tolerate the erasure of the struggle that women have had to deal with for centuries just to get the basic recognition and equality that we've got in this day and age, even though it's so far off from what we still deserve and need.
Okay. Just look, we're really reaching the end of the hour. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's just finish off with Fady in Purley. Fady, hi. What would you like to say?
So, apologies. I've just I've listened to this and I've become compassionate about calling. For me, it's more about a shutdown culture. So, we don't want the transgender culture to be shut down. Nobody wants that. But I'm starting to feel, I'm just being honest, so excuse me because I'm a little nervous, but I'm starting to feel as women we're being shut down. And shouldn't we actually get a common goal, a common understanding? Like, I don't see that. I just see aggression. I see hate, and I want to be with you, but you're never going to be biologically like us. But why can't we actually acknowledge that and move on? I just don't get it, and I don't feel as a woman that I'm able to be a woman without feeling shame, because I'm not accepting transgender, but then I completely accept them. But
okay.
I don't want to be shut down and not respected because I am a woman.
Right, thank you very much for that, Fady. Text here says there are 163 males in women's prisons in the UK. Half of those were convicted of at least one sex crime. How can that be acceptable? And that text I was about to... Here it is. P says, please share with Kathleen a huge thank you for trying to keep women safe and valued as the unique sex that we are. I don't know if you've enjoyed the last hour. You've actually had a lot more support than I think you have had.
Okay.
Final word to you.
It's a good conversation. We have to, thanks for having the conversation, even to the people who clearly disagree with me and don't like me, because at least we're now being able to talk about this, which we couldn't do a couple of years ago.
Kathleen Stock, thank you very much indeed for joining us on LBC.